Welcome to the Covert Access Team podcast. Today we're talking with CAT Chief Instructor Brian Harris about one of the most uncomfortable realities in physical security. Suppose you've broken into the building, ran the pen test, found the vulnerabilities, and remediated them with a client. You've eliminated all the likely outsider attack scenarios. So why isn't this enough?
So the reason why this isn't enough is because fundamentally you have two main threat actors when it comes to physical security. You've got your outsider threat, which is what we usually think of a guy in a balaclava at 2 a.m. breaking into the building, and then you have your insider threats, which is almost always completely ignored and forgotten. So if you, generally speaking, your clientele is going to be broken up into two categories of threat actors. And that is, if your client is selling merchandise, whether it's laptops, phones, art, anything with high value, you're usually concerned more with smash and grab style attacks, right? Nobody's going to be trying to break into the jewelry store downtown for corporate espionage purposes, right? They're breaking in to steal the jewels. Like, it's very simple. Mm-hmm. Nobody's breaking into the Louvre to figure out what the French president may or may not be doing next month. Like, sure. That's not the point, right? The point is to steal the merchandise. So, but by contrast, if you are trying to break into a high-profile location, maybe it's a government office, maybe it's a big corporate headquarters or bank or something else, oftentimes what you're trying to do is either some form of corporate espionage or bugging or basically get or manipulate information, data, or access to things. But if you have eliminated all likely attack vectors from the outside to the inside, whether that's from the outside of the building into the server room or the archive room or the board of directors, etc., that does not mean that you've eliminated those exact same different attack vectors from the insider threats, right? And the insider threats are far more nefarious because these are people who the company has already vetted, given access to, and said, we trust you.
Sure.
But we don't monitor you, we don't check, we don't know what you're doing, we just trust you.
I think a lot of people think that insider threats are really just for like governments or, spies and things like that. But it seems like there's a much more significant risk to like a corporate setting than most people might think. Do you agree?
Yeah, so fundamentally, anytime large sums of money are involved, you can usually bet there's some level of corporate espionage going on. Whether that's the low-level elicitation, where two relatively high-ranking people will have coffee, and then one will try to figure out what they're bidding on a government contract or something. Mm-hmm. I can give you a relatively, I wouldn't say high-profile, but it was fairly famous. And throughout this podcast, I'm going to be using the word allegedly a lot. Not
Sure.
because what I'm saying is false, but because for legal reasons, I'm just going to say the word allegedly. So there was an instance back in the 2019, 2018, somewhere in there. So Denmark was trying to figure out who was going to be their big telecom provider. And TDC was trying to decide whether it was going to be Ericsson or Huawei, if my memory serves correctly. Mm-hmm. And allegedly, what had ended up happening was that Huawei somehow found out exactly what Ericsson's bid was going to be and then underbid them at the last moment to try and cut them out.
Yeah.
Well, during all this whole thing, there was all of these instances where all of this documentation ended up being shifted over to a high-profile lawyer's office, and there was instances where unknown individuals were flying drones at night around the lawyer's office trying to see what was left on desks outside the building at 2 a.m. There was a whole bunch of other shenanigans. There was accusations of insider people who were giving Huawei, allegedly, insider information to help with all of this. And again, it's one of those things that there's an infinite amount of cases just like this, right? Anytime that there's a lot of money that's being exchanged, you can bet that there's some level of corporate espionage going on. Sometimes it's high profile, like this, where you might have governments or state entities getting involved. Sometimes it's much more subtle. But you have to understand that insider threats are as real, if not more so, than your outsider threat. And since most of so for the people who are going to be doing physical pen testing, the vast majority of your clients are not going to be Apple stores where they're selling laptops and stuff. It's going to be corporate entities, government entities, or places where espionage is more the likely attack vector. And so if you realize that people who do bad things, people who do stupid stuff, like let me say it this way. We do phishing campaigns not because we think every one of our employees is an insider threat. We do phishing campaigns because we want to make sure that our employees aren't stupid enough to click on things they shouldn't, right? That's the point. Well, there's a lot of ways of getting people to plug in USB sticks. Yes, I know it's modern year and nobody thinks they're stupid enough to do that, but there's lots of ways to trick people into plugging.
Never underestimate people.
Yeah, there's lots of ways of tricking people into plugging stuff in. There's lots of ways of getting people away from their unlocked laptops. There's lots of, all of these things exist, right? You don't necessarily just have to go after people who have been bribed, blackmailed, etc. You can trick people. You can make people think that they're doing the right thing. There was an instance in Hong Kong, I think about a year ago, where some poor guy was tricked by AI masking into transferring millions of dollars when he really shouldn't have. These types of things happen all the time. So it's not just malicious state entity. Oftentimes it's careless employee. It's employee who thinks they're doing the right thing because they're tricked. It's they're bribed or blackmailed, etc. So insider threats are a huge threat vector. And very often they're completely overlooked.
Sure. I'm glad that you brought up the carelessness aspect of it because it may not always be, like you said, malicious. So in your professional opinion, are insider threats more dangerous than external attackers, or are they just harder to detect?
Both. So the reason why insider threats, let me back up for a second. When you're running a physical pen test, or let me say it this way, if you have an attacker, an outside threat who's broken into a building, this is a very different threat. If I say, last night, someone broke through our front window, got inside, and they were inside the building for an hour and then they left. We don't know what they did, but they were inside the building for 1 hour and left. Okay, that's a threat. But it's on a different level. If I say, hey, remember that guy that we've been seeing, Bob, who we've been seeing around the office for the last 6 months, and we thought he was in accounting? He actually didn't work here. And
he did work here, but he was...
But no. But he's an outsider threat. Like, the guy who kept coming in and out had persistence into the building for 6 months, and he had convinced everybody that he actually did work there, or nobody thought anything of it. And this person that we saw coming in and going out for the last 6 months, who had access to everything, he didn't work here. This is the difference, right? So one of the things that you have to understand is that an insider threat has fundamentally an infinite amount of time to pull off theft, data manipulation, anything they want to do. It's not like they're just going to, like some guy in a balaclava who throws a brick through the window at 2 a.m, runs inside for an hour and then runs away. They have infinite time. And on top of that, as they are there, the longer they are there, they can develop assets. They can grow with the company. They can get access legally or legitimately get access to more and more and more things. The threat is usually on a different level.
So let's assume the company that we're talking about for like a physical pen test, they have done everything right. They have followed all of the remediation. They are, from an outsider's perspective, secure. If someone did want to do them harm, how would they go about doing that? Right.
Okay. So So if I told you, for all the listeners, think about this question. Suppose insert major Fortune 50 company, right? Whatever that is in your mind, Fortune 50 company. And I said, okay, by tomorrow afternoon, you have a deadline of noon tomorrow. I want you to bug the corporate boardroom. I want to be listening in to their super high profile meeting where they're going to be talking about all the R&D, their upcoming 2026 next year projections and strategies and projects, all the big important stuff, right? The overwhelming majority of people are going to say, that's not possible. You cannot do that within 24 hours. It's like, well, yeah, maybe that is too difficult, right? But if I gave you a week, suddenly it's becoming possible. If I gave you a month, it's becoming probable. If I gave you a year, suddenly it's almost a guarantee.
Sure.
Right? This is what I lovingly refer to as the infiltration formula. Basically, the longer and more patient an adversary is, the probability of them getting inside and getting access to all your stuff goes to 1. It goes to 100%. And so this is why it doesn't matter if you have locked everything down on the perimeter. You have to understand that insider threats are real. They happen every single day. And if you haven't accounted for them, then you basically what you've done with physical security is that you've told your client you are completely secure. And to an extent they are, from bad guys who are not part of the company. But from people who are part of the company, they are extremely insecure. And the entire company is within these people's hands. And oftentimes the company itself doesn't even understand whose hands they are. So I'll give you an example. You might think, well, the only people who have access to X, Y, or Z are, the IT admins. And it's like, well, are they?
Yeah, I often know.
The answer is almost always no. Because what about the cleaners? What about the interns? What about the people who have to go into the server room for whatever reason? Think about like the board of directors meeting room where you're going to be talking about all of the most important sensitive stuff. It's like, who has access to that room? Probably everybody, right? From the intern to the CEO. And so you start asking the question, what goes on in and around the client building? I was on a job a while back, and the client said, we're really, really concerned about the R&D room. The R&D room is like the most sensitive, most important thing in the entire building. So, okay. Doing an assessment of the building, we asked this question. We said, what is this big meeting room that's right next door to the R&D room for? And they said, oh, well, this is where we come in for the board of directors, and we present all the findings, all the R&D stuff to the board of directors and to anybody technical. And I said, okay, so you're doing all that, right? And I was like, yes, you're exposing all the R&D stuff that you're working on. And you said that's critically important. You're like, yes. I was like, well, the R&D room has 37 different security features about it. But the room where they're talking about everything that they're doing had none. And it's like, so you have to understand that anybody can go into that meeting room and sit there, bug the room, recording devices, hidden cameras, keyloggers, HDMI man-in-the-mills, whatever. And it's one of those things that you have to understand, like, what goes on where in the building, because oftentimes the client's not going to know. This is 99 times out of 100 when you ask any client what's the most important thing in their building, they're going to say the server.
Sure.
And they're not even a second thought.
They're not wrong. The server's important, but it may not be the most important and certainly not the only important
Exactly.
thing.
Yes, exactly.
But I feel like the concept of insider threats, though, may be a little like unwieldy for some physical pen testers. It's just a totally different mindset. How do you shift that mindset as a physical pen tester from attacker to trusted employee?
Right. Okay. So let's suppose for a minute that you have a diary that you write. Suppose that you write in your diary every single day, and to you, the most humiliating, embarrassing thing that could ever happen to you is if the wrong people got a hold of your diary.
Sure.
Okay. Why would you leave that diary for where everybody can go? Every one of your friends, every one of your acquaintances, every one of your fellow employees.
You wouldn't.
Like, you would never do that, right? If you're telling me that your diary, which contains all your deep, dark secrets, is the most, to you personally, the most important thing to you, and you would be devastated and emotionally ruined if everybody knew what was in your diary, right? Why would you leave it in a place where hundreds of people came and went and had access to it at any time, and you're just trusting them? No one's going to read it, no one's going to copy it, and no one's going to give it away or show pictures of it or anything else. Well, with most buildings, that's what you're doing. You have this flat physical security network where everyone can go anywhere. Everyone from the intern all the way to the CEO and everyone in between has access to every location in the building at all times. And even if you have somehow segmented it, so like, well, you can't go into the server room, but we never really monitor the server room, right? So it's one of those things that if you say, well, you need a different access card to get into the server room, therefore nobody can get into the server room. Okay, but underdoor tools exist. Door shimming exists. Lock picking exists. And so if the client says something like, the most important thing to us is the server room. There's nothing more important. We don't have offsite backups. It's the most sensitive, important thing we could ever imagine. But don't worry, because only the IT admins or only these very select few people actually have access to the room. Like, oh, okay, that sounds great, right? Until you ask the question, are there any active alarms during working hours in that room? And they will usually say no.
So then how do you know that they're the only ones going in?
Well, exactly. Because then the question is, well, okay, now you're just doing basically an insider pen test. Okay, so the bad guy has broken into the building. He's gotten to the server room. Can he use an underdoor tool or door shim or lockpick or anything else to bypass the door? The chances are probably. And then it's literally just, so if you have an insider threat and they've watched a couple YouTube videos or they've taken a class or they've practiced on their own door or whatever else and they can bypass that door in any way, shape, or form, you're done. That's it. That is your security, right? So that's your entire defense. And so really the whole point of this is very simple. You do not want to just protect against the guy in the balaclava at 2 a.m. You want to protect against potential insider threats, because keep in mind, outsider threats, if they're clever, especially for corporate espionage, they will blend in most of the time during the day. So they de facto become insider threats.
Gotcha. I feel like it is a little intangible for some people because they do tend to think that it's, rare. I'd like to talk a little bit about some examples. You already shared the TDC example, allegedly.
Allegedly.
What are some other historic insider threat cases that are particularly noteworthy to you?
Okay, one of the most famous, and I am going to use an infinite amount of allegedlys here for litigious reasons. But anybody who knows the group, the Church of Scientology, okay, and I'm going to just sprinkle in the word allegedly constantly here. Allegedly, well, let me back up. The United States government, this part's not allegedly, the United States government recognizes any entity, let me rephrase that, any entity that the United States government recognizes as an organized religion gets tax-exempt status.
Sure.
Okay, so if the United States government says you are an official, organized, recognized religion, you are tax-exempt. And that's a really nice thing to have, right? Imagine never again having to pay taxes on anything.
Sure.
Right? Super awesome. Now, allegedly, the Church of Scientology wanted tax-exempt status. And allegedly, the IRS originally said no. So allegedly, the Church of Scientology launched what was referred to as Operation Snow White, where they allegedly put hundreds of their members to get legitimate jobs at the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, all of these entities. And then when they reapplied for tax-exempt status, allegedly, with a lot of new information that those valid employees had garnered, they were granted religious status, that they were an organized religion. And you can kind of see how that might have played out,
Sure.
right? So it's one of those things that, think of it this way. You have an entity that wants to pilfer lots and lots of information. And I'm no longer talking about the Church of Scientology. This is a hypothetical. You have an entity that wants to pilfer a lot of information. Okay, so if you had hundreds of members, and those hundreds of members simply got legitimate jobs at any level, okay, high level, low level, janitor, senior, doesn't matter. They all have access, and they just start gaining information. Well, that's corporate espionage 101, right? This is what state entities do all the time. State entities, it would be in Russia or China or the United States or any government entity. It would be very useful to them to have operatives or agents who were getting legitimate jobs at other countries'
Top companies.
Top companies, or let me say it this way. Is there any vested interest for the Chinese to have high-ranking people at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon,
No,
Google?
I can't think of it. Literally any.
Yeah, exactly, right? So there's a lot of rationale for this. Now, here's a couple other interesting. I'll give you two Cuban examples. The Cubans are actually very good at espionage, which is something a lot of people don't think about. We all kind of just forget Cuba exists. But there's a young lady named Ana Montes, famous case where she worked for the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, and she spied for the Cubans for 17 years. So for 17 years, she was pilfering information out of the Department of Defense Intelligence agencies back to the Cubans, and she wasn't caught. And the reason why she wasn't caught was because, unlike really idiotic North Koreans who tried to do this recently and they got really overzealous, she just memorized documents. She focused on KIMS, the whole military keeping memories. She focused on memorization. And when she would go to do her job and she would write down documents or she would see classified information, she would go home later that day and recreate it. Okay, how do you prevent that, right? Well, it's very, very hard. And again, to show you how difficult it was, she got away with it for 17 years.
In a setting where espionage is actually something that is monitored
Correct.
and,
Correct. Yes.
actively worked against.
Yes. And so here you have a young lady who is vetted. The United States Intelligence Organization says, we trust you. Here is access to classified information. And she simply moved it along to people who were not in the United States purview or our best interest. A more famous case would be Victor Manuel Roach. He was a former U.S. ambassador for 40 years was working for the Cubans. Same thing, right? So Roach was pilfering information for the Cubans for 40 years. He met with dignitaries, he met with presidents, he worked for everybody, right? He was in the ambassador circles for 40 years.
Sure.
He had access to everything. Okay, well, see, that's a bit of a problem, because you have a person who you have vetted, who you have said, we trust you, and the longer you work here, the more we trust you, the more information and access we give you. What is to stop you from again, it's all just a trust network.
Well, in his case, he's also, by virtue of his status, getting probably materials he doesn't necessarily need to see just because he's so high up, versus, right. I want to talk a little bit about low-level employees.
Sure.
And what kind of threat they present, because to me, I feel like the big dogs would be the big threat.
Right, yeah. So it's the low-level people have arguably just as much access. And the reason why they have just as much access is because the overwhelming majority of entities have flat physical networks. So if you have a flat physical network, meaning that every person in the building can go everywhere at any time, there is no security. There's no difference between the CEO's level of access and the interns. So at that level, everybody from the janitor to the intern to the cook to the low-level employee to the high-level employee, they can all go anywhere at any time and do anything. And it's not just, get access to the server room. It's anything. It's, can I get access to the server room? Can I get access to the archive room? Can I bug the workstations? Can I bug the corporate boardroom? Can I bug the R&D room? It's anything. It's whatever your company or client is working on that is important to them. Chances are everybody has access. So think of it this way. It doesn't even have to be, even if you have segmentation, how easy would it be to ask somebody, hey, I don't have access to the R&D room, but, I've really, my little brother's really interested in this. Could he come one day, or could I take some pictures, or could I see this? What you're working on is so cool, right? Then it's just a social engineering game. And if you've worked with this person and you don't have any reason to distrust them, and you let them in places that you shouldn't, this is espionage. This is what espionage is, whether it's elicitation and social engineering, or data manipulation, or data theft, or whatever. But this is what this is. And most of the time, everybody has access to everything. And this goes for anything from police, military, government, corporate. Most of the time, once you're inside, you're inside.
Well, and, with the corporate aspect of it, because I know that many of our listeners probably do most of their pen tests in a corporate setting. Sure. Corporate and government isn't exactly black and white anymore, because there's so much governmental money going into private companies. Sure. There's so much national interest wrapped up in the success of private companies that it is very fluid. So I want to talk a little bit about which industries are being primarily targeted within a corporate environment. For me, I think tech, pharma, energy.
It's several things, right? There's really, let me say it this way. There really isn't any, it's basically power and control. Power and control. It's not an industry, it's power and control. So if you're talking tech, well, tech really doesn't have any power, right? NVIDIA, NVIDIA is a massive company, right? Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, these are massive companies. But if Raytheon tomorrow went out of business, the world will keep turning. Right? Nobody in the United States is going to go hungry tomorrow because Raytheon went out of business. But if
maybe the Raytheon employees.
But if the power grid went down for a week or a month or anything else, then you're going to lose lives, serious problems, etc. So it's not necessarily just infrastructure. A lot of it is, can we steal IP? Can we replicate things? I'll give you a famous case. There was I don't remember the gentleman's name. He was a Chinese national who was working on behalf of the U.S. government, and he was able to steal the... Allegedly, yeah. He was... Well, I think this one's actually definitive, but we can still say allegedly. He was able to steal the blueprints of the F-35, the F-35, the C-130 Spectre gunship, the F-22, etc. A lot of very, very important aircraft. Well, from the Chinese, so when Lockheed Martin was asked about the F-35, for instance, how long did it take to or the F-22, I think it was, how long did it take and how much money and time did it take to develop this? They said something like it was about $1 trillion in 12 years of R&D. And it's like, yeah, okay, so that's fairly realistic. But by this one guy gaining access this way, he was able to help the Chinese springboard, basically skipping the 12 years of R&D and skipping the $1 trillion of research and development costs and all the rabbit holes and all the shortcomings and everything else. And so, I mean, this is a really, like, you wouldn't say that, well, the Chinese getting access to a F-22 knockoff. It's like, okay, well, sure, that's really important. But the Chinese are keeping pace with the United States militarily by simply stealing everything and not having to spend the money, the time, the effort, etc., developing things.
Which is basically like stealing trillions of dollars worth.
Sure. Well, not only
getting trillions of dollars of a head start that you didn't have to pay for.
Well, exactly. So it's one of these things that you have to understand that whether it's IP theft, technical, but then of course there's other entities, right? Your media. It'd be really convenient if the Russians, for instance, were at high-level editorial positions at the BBC.
Sure.
Right? Because all the stories that involve the Russian-Ukraine war, they need to favor the Russians, right? So it's very beneficial to have people in positions of power and who are influential, everything from media to tech to infrastructure to government to everything. And so even positions that people wouldn't think of, like education, right? It's really good if the state entity said, like, well, our education program now will only say nice things about X and only bad things about Y.
Of course.
It is very broad of where these things actually are beneficial to companies, entities, state entities. It just is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, how do cultural, legal, or geopolitical factors complicate this insider threat detection?
Well, fundamentally, when it comes to state entities, the game is exactly the same. They just have more money and more time. That's it. So you have to realize that if for whatever reason you decided, I really don't like Microsoft, okay, whatever reason, right? And you're like, I'm going to get a job there and I'm going to try to
take them down from the inside.
Exactly. Okay, well, you could do that, but nobody's paying you your bills, right? And when you do that, it's a criminal offense. You're likely to get caught because you're probably not going to do it smartly. You're probably going to get caught. You're probably going to go to jail. And it's going to take you a long time. But when you're a state entity, if you're the Chinese, for instance, and you come over and you start working for Raytheon, let me back up. So the Chinese have something called the 1,000-Year Talent Program. It's basically what this is they take high school students from China who are really up-and-comers, right? Smart, gifted, no criminal background, etc. They help them to get to Ivy League schools in the West, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, etc. Then they help them to get really good jobs at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Google, NVIDIA, whatever. And at that point is when they start pilfering information back to the Chinese. Okay. That's a really hard thing to stop, right? You've got an applicant who happens to be Chinese. He's got a 5.0 GPA. He has no criminal history. He's the smartest person you've ever interviewed in your life. He's got a doctorate. He's got 5 master's degrees. So from a candidate perspective, he's
strong candidate.
He's an awesome candidate, right? He just happens to also be a spy.
Yeah.
And so, but the problem is that if he was to go to Lockheed Martin or NVIDIA or Google or anything else, and he was to commit espionage, he can always run back to China. And the Chinese will protect him. Same way with the Americans or the Canadians or anybody else, right? If you're a spy and you're operating in a target country and you're doing something silly,
as long as you get out before you're found out,
exactly, and you can get out, your country hopefully will protect you. And so that's kind of, and at the same time, you're kind of being paid double salary, which is kind of weird because if you are, a spy working for some major corporate...
Working really hard for both.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. And then it's just going to be the question of, how much are you getting paid?
I know that you are kind of trying to use different examples from different countries, but are there some countries, regions, industries that are more aggressively targeted for insider recruitment than others?
No, I think they all do it. I think that every country has their own spy program. I think that every country has a vested interest in spying on everybody else. It's just one of those things that I don't think any country literally just says, well, we wouldn't do that. I think that, yes, every country does this. I just think that the fundamental difference is the resources, right? I don't think that many people are concerned about Gambian spies.
Sure.
I don't think that many people are concerned about spies from Sierra Leone. I think that we're concerned about other things from Gambia and Sierra Leone. I think that we're, but it's not espionage typically.
Sure.
So, but if you asked, if I asked what countries are probably going to be involved in some level of espionage, yeah, we can all think of which ones are, yeah. So it's because they have the resources, they have the personnel, they have the technology, they have the money, they have the reach.
We've talked a lot about people who have literally started working somewhere already knowing that they are going to be an insider threat. We've also touched a little bit on people who are careless and become an insider threat unmaliciously. But what about like people who already work there, have worked there for a while, without being, without any bad intention, who are coerced or compromised or gradually radicalized? Is that really a threat vector?
Yeah, so it's one of these things that whether you go into a position thinking that I am here to commit espionage, whether you are slowly radicalized over time, whether you are bribed, whether you are tricked or coerced, all of these things are possibilities. Now, the slow degradation where somebody is either radicalized by an outside influence or by themselves yes, that is a real thing. Think about most people listening to this have had many jobs, right? Most people, they will, okay, I've had 6 jobs in my life. Well,
sure.
Ask yourself the question, why did you leave those jobs? Right? If you volunteered to leave those jobs, why did you leave those jobs? And if you were fired from those jobs, you kind of answered my own question. Because fundamentally, most people leave their job because they're disgruntled in one way, shape, or form. I'm not being paid enough, or I don't like the work culture, or I don't like the environment, or I don't like my boss, or some most people have complaints about their job. Most people have complaints about their work. The question is, are those complaints enough to do something stupid or bad? Right? And beyond that, so you might not go into a situation saying, when you walk into a job on day one, you're like, oh, I'm so excited to be here. But after 5 years or however long, or even a year, you're like, man, this sucks. I hate my coworkers. I hate my boss. I'm overworked. I'm not being appreciated. This, and I've got this better opportunity, across the way. Okay. Well, will you take advantage of that situation? You still have a station. One of the things that I've always found really interesting about insider threats in Europe is that a lot of European countries, especially Western European countries, they have a scheme where the longer you work at a company, legally, that company has to give you longer and longer severance. Well, the squirreliness of that situation is that if you've worked at a company for 5 or 10 years, the company for whatever reason decides to fire you, they may have to give you 6-7 months of paid severance. And that means, realistically, depending on how the company goes about it, you may have access to things for a long period of time after being fired.
Sure.
And so even if it's only like a couple weeks, it's like that. I mean, you can, if you've worked there for 5-10 years and you think that you've got all this loyalty going on and they let you go, there's probably going to be a lot of hard feelings. And it's going to be a question, right? So if you work at company A and you know all of their secrets because you've worked there for a long period of time, you're a senior level of somebody, you have access to information, you know what they're working on currently, you know their procedures, etc., and then you go work at company B, is telling company B, well, we used to do it this way at company A,
sure,
or we should do this, is that espionage? Well, to a degree it is, right? Well, company A, when I was at company A, when we were selling X, Y, or Z, we would sell it for this much. Is that espionage? Well, in a way, yes, it is, right? So this is one of those things that it happens all the time. That either it's a slow radicalization or you go into it thinking so. I mean, look at LinkedIn. When you look at most people's LinkedIn profiles and you look at how long have you worked at this or that company, it is more and more and more common now to work at a company for about a year.
Yeah, of course.
So you're seeing more and more people working at a company for anywhere from about 8 months to about a year and a half. And then they jump to another company and then they repeat the cycle. Okay, those people are not loyal to you. Why would they be loyal to you?
Sure.
And then think about this. When you're hiring people, what did you really do to trust them? If you're hiring somebody, say it's a senior level position or even mid-level position, and you're going to give them access to all the secret stuff, right? Well, what did you do to trust them with that information? Well,
you had an interview.
Maybe you had 2 or 3 interviews and maybe a competency test of some kind, and then you said, "Yep, we like you. here's the keys to the kingdom. Here's the all the secrets that we have. Please don't abuse this.
Gotcha. And I feel like, the short-lived nature of people's, chapters of their career also probably makes it a lot harder to track down, because they're there, they get the information, they leave. They're there, they get the information, they leave. You could serialize this level of espionage, and it will look like a just absolutely normal career trajectory.
Well, yeah, of course. And so let's talk for a minute here. What a lot of people listening to this are probably thinking, well, it would be very difficult for you to download information and steal it. And it's like, well, yes and no. So a lot of information I'm going to have access to just by the legitimacy of my job. So there was a story, I think it was last year, where the North Koreans, they got a legitimate job at a tech company. And then literally like the day they got access, they immediately started downloading everything en masse. And it was that mass dumping of info that the company was like, well, wait a minute.
Something here is fishy.
Yeah, like they're copying every file on the server. Like, what the hell? But think about it this way. What if they'd only copied one file over the course, like per week, or one file per day over the course of years? It's like that becomes really, really hard to spot.
Yeah.
And at the same time, through the legitimacy of your own station, you may just have access to stuff, right? You may not even have to go out of your way to find information. You may just be given information that you can then use to hand over to somebody else.
I mean, that's actually a good point. If you may have access to things without any actual reason for needing to look at them. Is that a vector for identifying potential insider threats? People looking at stuff that really they have no business looking at.
Right. So we try to handle this through the cyber end of things. I'm not going to name names from companies and entities, but there are AI-based and quasi-AI-based cyber protection schemes now, which will try to monitor, figure out what the employees' usual behavior is, and if they deviate from usual behavior, it'll set off red flags. So if Carol in accounting has never gone to the archive and started downloading files, doing that would, through her terminal, might trigger some weird, alerts. But again, it's only so useful, because what is it specifically that's going to be valued to your company? Well, are documents going to be the thing, or is it going to be information? I don't know. It depends on the company, right? So if I just go to a meeting and I bring a recording, like an actual old school recording device, or just my phone, and I just record the meeting, that might be the information. Especially if I go into some meeting with it, or even though I'm not in the meeting, maybe I just put a small recording device in a room where I know that a meeting is going to be occurring. Say that I'm a secretary and I know that there's going to be a really, really big important meeting going on in an hour. Why do I know this? Because I'm the secretary. I know every meeting that's going to go on in this room. And I simply put a small listening device in that room. I go in ahead of time. I put down drinks. I put down snacks. I make everything cozy. And I also place a small HDMI man in the middle behind the big TV. Or I also place a small tape recorder in there. Okay, you're never going to notice that. 99.9% of any company is never going to notice that. And
she's got to go in there and clean up from the cookies.
Exactly.
So she's got to go get it.
Exactly. And she's going to be the first one in and the last one out. So it's one of these things that you don't have to have like top level access. And you also have to ask the question, what is it specifically that would be damaging to your company? Maybe it's reputation loss. Maybe it's IP. Maybe it's data theft. Whatever. What is important to your client? And these are questions that oftentimes pen testers forget to ask. They forget to really ask the question. With physical pen testing, oftentimes the conversation is solely around, how do I get to the server room from the outside? That's the beginning and end of the entire thought process, consideration, everything. And it's like, okay, yeah, but what about the big important boardroom meetings? What about the R&D lab? What about the place where you talk about what you did at the R&D lab? What about the fact that you're in a shared office space and there's a public cafe on the ground floor where everybody goes to get their coffee, and I can start social engineering and eliciting information from you, or cloning your badges or anything else. So it's like there's all of these other vectors that people don't seem to think about or consider. And when let me say it this way. Suppose for a minute that your boss calls you in and says, we were remodeling the big corporate boardroom, And when we tore up the floorboards, we found this weird listening device. It seems to be a cell phone that is, sending data to a dummy server. We called the police and they wiped it for fingerprints. There's no fingerprints. We checked the security logs and the cameras, and the camera logs don't go back far enough to show who dropped it off. So we have no idea how long this has been here. We don't know exactly who's taking it because it's all the audio recordings are just being dumped into a C2, and the C2 is anonymous somewhere on Tor network or something. Okay, what is your reaction to that? How do you solve that problem, right? If in that meeting room you are discussing the most sensitive, important stuff, your R&D stuff, your IP, your strategies for next year, who you're going to fire, how you're going to, corner the market, etc. All these important meetings are happening in this room, and you just happen to find this listening device. Okay, what's the next step? There's no fingerprints on the device. The police say they can't do anything to help you. You don't know how long it's been there. You don't know where it's going or who has it. What's the plan, right? So this is...
What is the plan?
But that's the tricky part. That's where you have to work with the client and figure out, okay, we've got to go through everything. This is incident response. Now we're in incident response. The job of offensive work is to not let that happen. But the whole point of this is you have to look at insider threats. You have to realize that these are real things that really do happen. And if there's money or power or control involved in any company or entity, there's likely espionage in some way, shape, or form.
What would you say are the biggest mistakes organizations make when they think they're monitoring insider threats?
Like everything else, they will say cyber. That's it. That's the beginning and end of it. It's, okay, when you're running a physical pen test and you ask the client, what are your most valuable things in the building? Server room. Full stop. That's it. Server room. They won't think about anything else that goes on. They won't think about anything else that's vulnerable. They won't think about anything. It's just server room. Well, when it comes to insider threats, they do the exact same thing. They say, well, but we have, and I'm not going to name names, we have Insert's quasi-AI monitoring service that's going to check if Carol is actually downloading stuff from the server. Okay, but what if Carol just goes to the archive and pulls the documents, the physical documents? Or what if Carol goes to somebody else's terminal who has access and then just downloads it? Or what if Carol, the secretary, says, I'm supposed to get reports for the big board meeting and I need to print them all out so I can put them on the desk for all the board members to come in. Well, I need access to that to print them, right? So there's a lot of possible methods of getting sensitive data, sensitive information, and most clients will just say cyber. Cyber. That's it. That's the beginning and end of anything.
To what extent of that knee-jerk to cyber is the sense that insider threats are kind of inevitable?
Well, that's the whole point, right? That's my whole infiltration formula thing, is that if the adversary is patient enough, they are almost guaranteed to get inside. And that's where your question is, assume that somebody is inside. How do you stop them from taking over the company? How do you stop them from actually doing bad stuff? And that's where you insulate things. That's where you ask the question, why does everybody have access to everything inside the building at all times? If you're telling me that the archive room or the R&D room or the server room are critical, why is the alarm in those rooms ever off, even during the day? Right? It's like, so it's one of these things that if you're going to tell me that your diary is the single most important thing to you, that nobody ever gets a chance to read it because it's super embarrassing to you and it would emotionally cripple you, why are you leaving it in a place with hundreds of people walking around it and you're just trusting they would never look at it? Why are you doing that? So you would, again, like, this is the whole point, right? Like, the more important something is to you, the more care you will take to protect it. But when it comes to this type of stuff, companies don't seem to think about it. They don't even seem to understand or recognize the possibility that, well, this is an issue. Think of it this way. Let's say that you have a gentleman in sales at insert company name, and he's worked for you for 2 years, and you fire him, or he quits, and he goes on to another company. What information about your company does he know? He knows all your clients. He knows your strategies. He knows what you're offering those clients. He knows a lot of information. He knows how to undercut you. He knows what your financial situations are. He has a lot of insider information. So even if he doesn't intentionally want to just destroy you, you realize that information, if he knows your financial status, he knows what you're bidding on various contracts, you're trusting. Now, I know that a lot of people are going to say, well, yeah, but we would sue him if he... But really think of it from his perspective. He goes to work at another company, and that company says, well, we really need to know that information. It can really help us if you could just give us an idea of what you think we should sell or we should bid on this for. Well, is he ever going to get caught? Right? So it's one of these questions that this kind of crap happens every single day, and it's something that most people don't even think about.
And to be fair, is he ever going to get caught? The line for illegality is probably a little fuzzy.
Exactly. It's very fuzzy. But it goes back to the idea of how would you know?
Yeah.
How would you know?
Even if you did know, the line is fuzzy. Yeah.
Exactly.
So how should physical pen testers test for insider threat exposure during an engagement? What should they be looking for?
Okay. When you're running, so most of the people who listen to this let me say not most, but a lot of people who are listening to this come from the cybersecurity, especially the cyber offensive world. Okay. When you are running a laptop test or a network pen test, you use what's called an assumed breach. You say, okay, let's assume that somebody got a hold of the laptop, and now we're going to run through various scenarios. Scenario 1, the laptop is locked down. Can you open it, right? You know how to bypass BitLocker or whatever, which now we all know how to do. But, okay, scenario 2, you have the laptop, and it was left unlocked. What can you do with it, right? Okay, but that's kind of what you're doing here, right? From a pen testing perspective, remember, just like a cyber pen test, it would be unfathomably sleazy and disingenuous if you did a pen test, cyber in any way, shape, or form, found one vulnerability and said, called it quits because I found a vulnerability. But a lot of times, that's how physical pen testers do things. They say, aha, I tailgated into the building, I walked right into the server room because it was left unlocked, mission success, mission over. It's like you have not actually tested their facility. You walked in, you did the low-hanging fruit, you got into the building, good for you. But now keep banging away at it and find all the vulnerabilities. Well, similarly, when you're doing a physical pen test, look at it from an outsider attack perspective and look at it from an insider attack perspective, right? So realize that, now, okay, let me back up. There's a few instances where you will not do this.
Okay.
The instances where you will not try to be exhaustive on a pen test is where the client says, we just want to scare the board of directors, or we want we're legitimately testing our defensive side of things. So from a cyber end of things, if the cyber end of things says, okay, we just want a pen test to see what could you do, realistically test our defenses. Okay. Well, if you're realistically testing your defenses, then you're not going to be loud and stupid, right? You're going to purposefully try to be as sneaky as possible. Conversely, if the board of directors says, look, we understand that we have a lot of problems, but we don't have the money to fix them, so I want you to run a physical pen test, sneak into the building, get into the, put put a calling card underneath the CEO's chair and scare the crap out of them. And then next year, that'll give me leverage to get a lot more money so we can fix the problems. Okay, in that instance, don't get caught. And don't get caught means don't do stupid stuff. But the vast majority of instances when you're running a pen test, whether it's physical or cyber, you want to be as exhaustive as possible because you want to give the client what they're paying for, right? The client is not paying you to just say, I found a vulnerability or I tailgated in on Monday. Okay, and? Right? So your client is paying you to probably be exhaustive, to test their security, just like you would with any other pen test, whether it's a web app or a network or Wi-Fi or anything else. So when you're running these types of things, make sure that you're running them with the two scenarios in mind. How would we break into the building? And once we're inside the building, what could we or would we do? And I know a lot of pen testers are probably thinking, well, we already do that. And it's like, well, yes, that's great. But realize when you're doing the assume we're inside, well, that means if you're doing an insider threat, you already have an access card. You have access to all the places that employees do. Okay, so that may literally just be a different test. You may literally segment this into two separate tests. We're going to do an outsider test, and then we're going to come in and assume you're going to give us an ID badge, and now we're going to wander and see what we can get access to and what we can do, right? And this gets a little bit closer into an audit, but again, you want to be as exhaustive most of the time. You want to be as exhaustive as possible, and you want to make sure that you're testing this from outsider perspective and insider perspective. So I'll give you one more caveat. Let's suppose for a minute that your client is running something like a Desfire version 3 card. Unclonable currently. Can't do anything with it, right? Okay, great. But if you're doing an insider threat perspective, every single employee has one that's valid.
Woohoo!
Right. So, but the whole point of that is if you're doing a genuine insider threat, you would have one. Okay. So if you're doing an insider threat assessment, you can't then turn around and say, well, we don't have a card. It's like, no.
Sure.
You should have a card, because if it's a genuine insider threat, you should have the same type of card as any other employee, right? So and you should have access to everywhere the employees have access to. So it's kind of like, it's kind of that type of assessment.
And you've partially answered this question, but I feel like there's probably more that we can pick your brain on for it. So what insider threat scenarios should be explicitly included in a black team or pen test and usually aren't?
Well, again, it really depends, right? So the instance where the two instances, maybe there's three, but the two instances that come to mind where you are going to not include an exhaustive list of trying to break in is going to be the client's trying to scare the board of directors into a larger security budget. Okay, you're not going to be exhaustive there, because exhaustive usually means higher probability of getting caught. And if the entire point is to scare the board of directors and say, oh my God, we didn't realize things were that bad, we'll definitely put more money into the physical security budget so that we can fix all these things, right? Well, it's not going to help the facility manager or the CISO or whoever hired you. It's not going to help their case if you got caught, right? So in that specific instance, don't be exhaustive. Just sneak in, scare the board of directors, do sneaky stuff, get out. The other one is if they legitimately want you to test their security, but they want you to try to simulate like a threat, like a state entity or something else. Okay, then also don't get caught. But in most cases, when you're running a pen test, whether it's a web app pen test or a network pen test or a Wi-Fi pen test or a physical pen test, you're trying to be exhaustive. That's what you're being paid for. You are being paid to be as exhaustive about this as possible. You are not being paid $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 or whatever it is to do a web app pen test and say, well, I found an iDoor on your login portal. Done. Right? No. That's a low-hanging fruit, and you should, or I did a directory brute forcing with Derb, and hey, what didn't you know? I found a way to bypass the login portal. Okay, you're still not done, right? That's not done. So similarly, when you do this kind of thing, you don't say like, well, the back door to the kitchen was left open and I just walked in, and then once I walked inside, I walked into the main area and I walked upstairs and the server room was left unlocked, and so now I'm in the server room and yay, mission complete, right? It's like, no, it's not. It's you found a way in and good for you, but you didn't gain persistence, you didn't test really anything. So you need to be as exhaustive as possible in most instances.
So how can pen testers safely demonstrate insider risk to clients without accusing or targeting real employees?
By pretending to be them. You don't, you can say, okay, give me access to everything that the employees have. Give me a badge. Let me be here anytime that the employees are here. And if the employees are given the access code to the building to turn the alarms on and off, I should have that too. Whatever, you're assuming that I am Bob, the new hire.
So you're assumed employee, so basically any fallout from what you found is on you.
Correct.
Which is what they've paid you to do.
Correct. So I don't have to actually social engineer real employees. I don't actually have to harm real employees.
Yeah, you're not trying to sniff out insider threats, essentially.
No, you're saying, give me all the access and privileges that a normal employee would have, and I'm going to run with that and see what I could do. Now, you're still doing a pen test, right? So you're just the new hire, and maybe the client says like, oh well, he's a contractor or he's an employee or whatever the guise is, but you're given the same rights, privileges, freedoms, and information as any normal employee, and you're going to run with that and see how far can I take this.
Sure.
Right? What can I do? Could I bug the corporate boardroom? The answer is probably. Can I bug workstations? Almost guaranteed. Can I get to the server room? Probably. And that's kind of what you're doing, but you never have to say, oh well, I specifically asked Carol in accounting to walk with me to the server room and I tricked her into doing it. No, that's not what you're doing.
Yeah. So what do you want every physical pen tester listening to this episode to start doing differently?
So a couple things, but first off, understand the risk to your client. Okay. Now this is not universal. This is not always true, but generally speaking, if your client is merchandise based, it's going to be smash and grabs. If your client is not merchandise based, it's probably some form of espionage. Okay. Now, again, that's not universally true, but it's mostly true. And then you have to look at it from two perspectives, insider threat and outsider threat. And that goes for both of the former scenarios, right? If your client happens to be a jewelry store, well, you are certainly concerned with the guy who's going to sneak in at 2 a.m. and break through the window and steal the jewels. But you should also be concerned with the guy that you gave the key to.
Sure.
Right? So, and it goes in same thing with the espionage thing. So you have to understand the guy who you've given the key to, oh no, he forgot to lock up on Tuesday, and wouldn't you know it, somebody broke in on Tuesday. He forgot to set the alarm on Tuesday, so he's going to get fired for sure. So
inventory's off.
Right, exactly.
Again.
Right. So you have to understand that you have to look at this from what is most likely to harm your client. And you have to look at these situations from both the outsider's perspective, the outside threat perspective, but also the inside threat perspective, and realize that in most instances, when it comes to corporate espionage, corporate, government, military, etc., it's not the guy who's sneaking into the building most of the time. It's going to be the person who's already been given access to the building. Maybe they are tricked, maybe they are coerced, maybe they are bribed, maybe they are blackmailed, maybe they're disgruntled, maybe they're just in it for the money. Right? Hey, I hate my company and I could steal this money and this other company said that if I give them X, Y, or Z, they'll give me a huge raise, whatever. So you don't know the motivation, and really the motivation doesn't matter. It's just you have to understand that insider threats are a real thing. And if you protect the client from the outside threats, that's great. But you've done nothing to protect them from the insider threats.
Sure. All right.
So let me, before you finish, let me just say it this way. Assume for a moment, hypothetically, that you have a building, and let's say for a moment that you have somehow managed to make it impenetrable from the outside. Nobody can get in from the outside. Whether they're charming, in a balaclava, they've got Syntex or a rocket launcher, no one can get inside from the outside. Okay, only authorized personnel. That does not mean your client is secure. Because anybody who's been given access can do anything they want, probably. And that doesn't necessarily just mean copy files from my laptop. It could literally mean anything. It could mean go to the archive room and take pictures of stuff. It could mean sit in on a meeting with a recording device. It could mean eliciting information from somebody about like how much money are we bidding on this contract. It could mean anything, right? And so these are people who you as a company have vetted and said, I trust you.
Sure.
I've given you the keys. And also realize that it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be the senior level X or the board of directors Y. It could be the janitor. It could be the intern. It could be the secretary. It could be anybody, right? Like just take the secretary, like from a previous example. The secretary is going to have information of every meeting months in advance. They're going to have access to all kinds of things. You know what also the secretary is going to have? Extra badges. They're going to have access to all kinds of... Think about all the stuff the secretary does, right? They're making meetings, they're making appointments, they're giving people badges, they're revoking badges. They probably know where the safes are or where the layouts of all the buildings and everything else. They're probably there first thing in the morning before anybody ever shows up. They're probably there late at night. They probably have access codes to turn the alarms on and off. Could they do bad things to you? Yeah, probably they could. And it's like, but most people don't think it. Now, I'm not saying go assume that all your secretaries are out to get you. I'm just saying that realize the actual threats and understand that people who are given these things, see, think of it that way. If the secretary knows all the meetings, they know the building layouts, they have an access badge, they have many access badges, they know the codes to turn the alarms on and off, they know all this information. They didn't have to steal any of it. They didn't have to learn it. They didn't have to clone badges. They didn't have to do any recon. They were just told all these things. They could give that information to people. They could abuse it themselves. They could do anything they want with it, right? And it's, yeah. So just realize when you're going through with this kind of stuff, you have to look at these situations from actual likely threat actors and not just say, well, the guy who's going to sneak in or tailgate in, or he's going to put a really nice suit on and he's going to walk in and, fingers crossed that he can just walk through. Also realize that the people who are in suits who are active hires may just as likely be your threats.
Well, thanks for joining us for today's conversation on insider threats. We hope this helped clarify why insider risk is such a critical part of physical security, how it actually shows up in the real world, and what physical security teams and pen testers can do to better identify and reduce it.